Well, hello, everyone. My name is Chris Detzel, and I am the Community Program Manager. We have yet another webinar coming your way. I'm super excited about this particular webinar. It's on matching and merging. We have our specialist, Joel Snipes. He's a senior technical consultant joining us today. And this will be our last, no, it won't. We have one in July next week as well. So I'll stop there. So a little bit of housekeeping as usual. Keep yourself on mute. Please ask your questions in the chat. I will make sure as usual that in this case, Joel answers those questions as best he can. We do have another couple of Reltians that are on as well that could also help with some of those questions, but we want to make sure that we capture those. Webinar will be recorded and shared out to the Reltio community maybe this week into maybe next week. Now, as usual, I haven't got any takers yet, but I know I'm going to get a taker or two. We are looking for other presenters to do some of these webinars, our customers, or even some of our partners. So you can email me directly at chris.detzel@reltio.com. And maybe I'll reach out to you directly. We have these two webinars. We have the webinar today on MDM matching and merging today. And next week, because you asked for it, we have another webinar coming out on event-driven integration with Reltio, including a look at Reltio with Kafka. Right now in August, I don't have anything scheduled, but I am working with a few folks to schedule a couple in August, which I wasn't going to do, but there seems to be some demand for that. And certainly September will fill up that schedule, which is not there yet. You can sign up for those webinars or for that, at least the webinar coming up at community.reltio.com/events/calendar. So without further ado, I don't have anything else, and I'm going to go ahead and give this over to Joel.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to share what we do in PS with Match and Merge. So let me go ahead and get these going.
Yeah, I'm excited because it's going to be more than just presentation. He has some demo stuff too to show, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, we're going to go live into my my personal tenant and show a few cool things off and neat little features I think a lot of people might not know about or might not know exactly how to use.
Perfect.
So match tuning and match merge and Reltio, match tuning is the process of developing match rules and making them better and iteratively improving them. And so to do match merge in Reltio, you have to build and tune your match rules. And there's really a 3-step process in the match tuning lifecycle. And when we're going live with a new rule, each rule often goes from anywhere from 2 to 5 cycles of analysis, design, and tuning. The first step to developing a match rule really starts with diving deep into your source data and doing a lot of profiling. You take the analysis of that profiling and that drives the design of your match rules. Once you have an idea of what you want your match rule to look like, you can implement it and start testing and iterating on your design based on the feedback you get from our analysis tools and the performance of the match and merge process on your data itself. So I think a really underappreciated part of developing match and merge rules is the importance of profiling. If you don't have a strong understanding of what your data looks like, the cardinality of your data, how complete your records are, and this needs to be done for each and every source that you bring into Reltio, it's going to be very difficult for you to develop good match rules, especially that first cut is going to be really difficult. So when you're doing profiling and for a Reltio match merge exercise, there are a few things you really need to key in on. Cardinality is probably the biggest. If you don't have a high level of cardinality, which is just very unique record. So in our example here, we have a customer ID and it's 100% unique. There is a cardinality of 1-to-1 here, right? For every record, there are no missing and each one has a different value. And this makes for a very good matching attribute because a high level of cardinality means you're very likely not to get bad matches. Although perfect uniqueness and distinctness here means that there's not going to be any duplicates to match and merge on. So a match rule on customer ID, for example, wouldn't make sense because there are no duplicate customer IDs. Whereas account number, you start to notice, hey, there's a few duplicate account numbers here. Those might be the same people. So that's where this profiling exercise becomes very, very valuable, because if you don't know what your data looks like, you can't design a rule. And there's a lot of tools out there. You can use something like Talend, or you can just make some SQL queries to kind of fill out what each of your tables you're loading in the Reltio look like. Another valuable thing to look for in profiling is you want to look for values that are maybe the 10 most common values in each field. And what we'll see a lot of times is you'll have a lot of birth dates that are coming in at 12/31/99999, and there's a downstream system just populating bad data, or maybe users are just putting in a made-up birthday. And our best practice is to not load that. So profiling lets you catch this bad data before it makes its way into Reltio, and you can kind of handle for it. Same thing for like a social security number that's just 1 through 0. That's not going to add any value to your match and merge, and you can save yourself a lot of headaches of having to delete and reload by catching some of these data anomalies before they make it into your system. One of the cool features Reltio offers is some noise dictionaries.
Joel,
yes.
Sorry, can we ask questions as you go along, or do you
Sure.
want us to wait?
Yep.
Sorry, it's Sandro. How are you, Joel?
Doing well. How are you, Sandro?
Good, thanks. On the common values, we have that problem right now where in some cases there's a default SID number that's assigned, right, at a crosswalk. Is there a way within the platform that we can ignore it as opposed to not loading it?
Hey Joel, I can take that if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, you do have a way. You can mark those values as something that you don't want matching engine to consider as a valid value. So those are treated as if they don't exist or as if they are null. So yeah, there is a way to define that.
And sorry, where do you define that? We can take it offline, but it would be good for us to know where you define that so we can ignore it.
Yeah, we can share that detail.
Yeah,
it's
that'd be
in
great.
the documentation. Yeah.
Thank you. If you can send that, maybe a link to me, that'd be super.
Yeah, that's something that we could probably post on the community. So I like that idea, Sandro. So maybe we'll post that question. I'll get Suchin to answer that directly.
That'd be super. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. And so I wanted to mention that you can also catch a lot of noise words. We could have a very common example is if you're loading organizations, you could have IBM Inc. or just IBM. In reality, those are probably the same company, but Inc. is kind of this meaningless thing that gets tagged on a lot of times. And so if you do some profiling ahead of time for the existence of noise words in your organization names, or maybe suffixes are landing in your last names or first names, if you catch those ahead of time, you can be aware of whether or not you should use a noise dictionary on some of these. And I'm going to have an example of using a cleanser or a dictionary later in this presentation of how you might improve your matching in that kind of way.
Hey, Joel, quickly,
yes.
Are you going to show an example of address standardization for, like, example, Germany?
Sure. Let's bounce over to my tenant real quick, and we can show an example.
Not to get you off too much, but I think that's a good idea, though, on that one.
Oh, no worries. So let's do a quick.
I would like to understand how the situation with diacritic sign working. For example, if you take city of Köln, let's say there are several ways how to write it. You can write it as Köln, Köln with O umlaut, and Köln with just O. Will it be treated as 3 different cities or as one city?
Yeah, they'll be treated as just one city, and that's really, you're talking about this. This is the right city, right? We're talking about Cologne.
Yes.
Let me find a quick address
You need to
here.
find it in German. You see here.
Let's see if we can find an address to use as an example. Or let's see. We'll grab a UPS. That'll do. So yeah, with the special character of the O.
Mm-hmm.
So let me make an organization instead of a person here. So Reltio uses locate to standardize addresses, and what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and create 2 of these. One of them written out kind of like the English way.
It's a good example with Straße and so on. Yeah.
So let me make UPS here, and let me make the same address, but let's spell it out like kind of.
Instead of Köln, you can put not Cologne. Okay, you can just put Köln. It is so with capital letter K-O-A.
Like this?
No. K-O in English K-O-E-L-N. This is a standard way of transliteration. And instead of Straße, put just STR.
Put an S here, like this.
Yeah, STR. No. STR dot abbreviation.
Oh,
STR dot. Okay,
like,
use this.
Oh yeah, like this. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to create UPS twice, and we're going to see how the same city spelled 2 different ways here will be standardized by locate to let's put business, since this is a mandatory field, or let's say we'll put organization. Let's make sure we got that here. All right, so what value are we missing?
I'm sorry, is it done by locate?
Yes, it is. So this is the first one being created. So that's saving. And this is a entity location model here. So sometimes we do create location as a
Okay.
as a nested attribute. In this case, we're creating it as an entity. And so it found this address at the airport, and we got partial verification. It looks like we got to match level 4. And over here, let's go ahead and save this one. So I got to create this and save. And my only hesitation with using the German address here is,
I have a question here. So right now you have saved it as address line 1, right? Shouldn't it be separately in each country state? You might need to edit this address.
that could be. So
And normally city should be different field, or the postal code should be different field.
Yeah,
if you
so
click
you can put
more
it in,
attributes.
the cleanser will break it out into separate pieces. In my demo tenant here, I think my locate is licensed for the US. And my concern is both of these were partially verified. They didn't find either of these addresses. So that might be a little tough using Germany as a,
Coverage of locate is as well good question. So if you are using locate, it will fail in, I don't know, for Germany, it will fail in 20% of the cases, and for Bulgaria, it will fail in 90% of the cases.
I see. So yeah, that's what we're struggling with here. Both of these addresses, either with either spelling, are
It's,
coming in
let's say,
partially
one of
verified.
our biggest tension point with Reltio, that you are using locate for geographical services that is not satisfying us at all. Sorry to say.
I
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
Georgia, I think that might be something we should kind of look at, going a little bit deeper, and maybe we are. I don't know with you guys, but certainly.
We have regular meetings about this.
Okay.
For last at least half a year, and because we don't see any progress, and locate people stop showing on these meetings.
Okay.
And how to say, because they do not keep promise. For example, they have promised to deliver something in 4th of July of this year, and we don't see improvement. And it's, how to say, very complex way to explain people why we are using a tool that is working in such a nasty way.
Yeah.
Because everybody could immediately compare with Google, and Google works much better.
It's always tough to compare to Google, that's for sure. So, well, Joel, if we can just kind of move on, and I don't know that we're going to solve that problem today, but
here, I'm sorry, I was just trying to understand how standardization is used, because it's one of our biggest problem to understand. You can try in, I don't know if you have license for India, for example, because locate in India, coverage of locate in India is awful. Or, for example, in Hong Kong. So where people using English, but one of our biggest point is diacritic signs. It's like Köln with these 2 dots. This is called diacritic signs, and let's say we have used in our database. We ask them, please put it in Latin characters only. And therefore, in Germany, they replace SZ, for example, with 2S, and they replaced O umlaut, it's called O umlaut, with OE, or OE, if we are talking in English, let's say, alphabet. So this is not easy to do.
Yeah.
This to compare. Therefore,
hey, Joel and Chris. This is Dave Starnes. I could definitely see how this could be a problem with address cleansing, and we're certainly spoiled with locate services in the U.S. Maybe a nice enhancement request would be to allow customers to incorporate third-party address cleansers outside of the locate service, if that's at all possible. One that's maybe, so that a customer could use, say, Google or some other service if locate's not filling the needs. Because right now, as customers, we are tied to using the locate service, right?
That's right. And I have seen a few cases where a customer will actually just turn off location cleansing, and they manage cleansing internally on the way in using something like Address Doctor or similar.
Yep.
So that there is some standardization. It would be nice to have it tied in the way locate is, so that you could just swap services, because like you said, Georgie, that there's places like India and in Germany, maybe the coverage is not anywhere near the level it is in the US. So that was what I was going to suggest in the short term. Potentially, we should consider.
India and Germany is not the worst example, believe me. And moreover, if you take information about coverage from their website, sometimes it is wrong. So.
And I don't want to go too far off the match merge topic, but just coming off the cuff, one of the things that I would consider would be
We can try the same for name standardization, because I think you have something there for name.
yes.
I have asked as well a question. If you are, for example, this noise words you are using only from English, or you are using noise words from other countries as well. Because one thing that we have realized that, for example, it was again for address. I remember that using Reltio, I was able to find out that boulevard is, I think, BLVD in United, abbreviated as BLVD in United States, but it is abbreviated as BD in France. So I was able to find that boulevard and BLVD it's the same, but BD was totally ignored.
That's a valid concern.
We as global company, we are always interested to understand how it works globally, not only in English.
Of course.
There's a couple routes you could take to manage something like that too. With localization or RDM, you could standardize to one standard or the other. With the out-of-the-box cleanser focusing on BVD, you might use RDM to change BV to BVD, would be a quick way to solve it. A more thorough way of solving it would be a custom name dictionary. So while we have the out-of-the-box ones that have an English focus, you could, you're also able to configure custom noise dictionaries that would include different countries' abbreviations and would kind of help with the standardization in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think, and Georgia, we'll have to either take this offline more and just dive deeper in. I know that we've been working with you guys for a while, but I would like Joel to kind of get back on track, so we can finish the webinar, if that's fair. Dirk?
It's okay for me. I just, let's say, tried. I have tried to ask a question, but I don't want to, let's say, break your webinar. So please continue.
Sure. And I would love to definitely put those questions in the community because I would love to follow up on them. And I put a link to the docs on that custom cleanser. So that last note on that topic. But standardization, you want to know if your emails and phones and addresses are in a somewhat valid format inbound, and possibly consider where your addresses are coming from as well. Something we might have learned already in this seminar. So once you have an idea of what your data looks like, there's kind of 3 different types of attributes I like to put into buckets for developing match rules. Identifying attributes are attributes that are highly unique and highly complete. An example of this would be a social security, email, or phone, but it could vary for your data set. And these are the ones that are going to drive your match rules. Maybe each match rule will have a different identifying attribute associated with it. And just because someone matches on email or phone doesn't mean they necessarily are the same person. And that's where we come to our differentiating attributes. They have low levels of uniqueness and may or may not be complete. So examples of these are gender. You couldn't use gender alone to determine if 2 individuals were the same, or if they shared a city if 2 individuals are the same. But they could help you exclude bad matches from the identifying attributes. So if 2 people shared an email but had different genders, you might assume they are not the same person, whereas without gender, you would assume they likely are. So match rules are generally combinations of an identifying attribute to bring things together and differentiate attributes to exclude and make the matches more specific. Our third type of attribute we use is almost metadata. They categorize your data within the set. So if two addresses matched, you might assume that they are the same person, but the address type is going to matter here. So this is data that describes a subset of another attribute. So address type describes addresses, university describes the type of education. So in these examples, if they shared a home address, you might want to match, but sharing a PO box or a billing address might just mean they share the same billing provider. So you wouldn't want to match there. And these categorizing attributes help you further exclude or reduce the set of data you're going to consider. In the situation of education, two people graduating the same year might be a positive sign, but if they graduated the same year at different universities, they likely aren't the same person. So as you take a look at what your data looks like and you start to break it into these buckets, you start to get a framework of how you can build rules in Reltio. And what I want to show you, let me pop over to some of our out-of-the-box Account 360 rules. And the way you get to your match rules in Reltio is you go to console from this chocolate bar in the top right corner. You go to data modeler. And then you choose the entity type you'd like to consider. So we're going to look at contact, and then you can go to match rules. So out of the box, we have a few match rules here. And thinking about the categories we were talking about with identifying versus differentiating attributes, address is a highly identifying attribute. So we have an exact type match on address, but we're doing a fuzzier, looser matches on things that are common between people. They can share a first or a last name or a suffix. So in this way, we have an identifying attribute driving and differentiating attributes reducing the data set. So now that you've bucketed your data and analyzed it, it's time to start building rules. And I have a few best practices on what to do as you're developing your match rules. The first one is to keep your match rules as a suspect type in the beginning. And this is important because it's much more difficult to unmerge data than it is to merge it. So auto matches, which are, the action is here. You can automatically merge or potentially merge. So this is called the suspect setting. You can change your rules. Your suspect pool will change each time you modify the rule, but nothing will be merged that has to be undone. So you never want to change to an automatic merge until after lots of investigation, looking at potential matches and having a very, very high confidence rating that all your matches are correct. So that's one best practice.
Correct.
Yes. So you wouldn't want to merge John Smith with Mary Smith, right? That would be a bad match. Whereas John spelled two different ways would likely be a good one. So after you developed your, let me show you kind of how I would do it. You have if you come to search and you put in match rules or potential matches, you can get a look at what your match rules look like here. So let's say we're considering this rule here. Fuzzy first name, fuzzy last name, exact email. What I would have you do after you develop the rule is click through to one of these profiles, go to this potential match view, and start reviewing. So we look at Julie Sweet versus Julie Sweet. They share an address. These are very, very likely to be the same person, right? This is a good match. So I would likely merge and then go to the next record. And so after going through a large set, maybe 100, you would see over time that you have not had any bad matches. These have all been very high confidence matches. Now you can go and turn this to an automatic rule so that no one has to go through here and manually click merge each time. However, if you're going through here and you're finding matches here and there that are not the same person, and you're having to click not a match fairly often or at all, you would probably want to leave this as a suspect rule and have data stewards only manually merge these and not have the system automatically do it. So while you're developing in general, everything should be on this create potential match setting. You should never create something first time as an automatic merge. Even if it's on something very tight like Social Security or maybe an old MDM systems ID, it's best to at least start with this suspect setting and making sure that things are working the way you expect them to, rather than having to go back and undo it.
Hey, Joel,
Yes.
I've got a few questions for you. So one common is we have seen examples in real world where some address is being used by many HCPs, especially contacts. And so that was just but a couple questions here. Did you build your own secret sauce for fuzzy determinant, or are you using a standard? And if so, what standard?
That is a great question. So I don't know if it's so much the secret sauce, but how our fuzzy works is really well documented here. And there are a lot of options into what you can do with fuzzy matching. And that comes down to tokenization and comparators. So when you have a fuzzy name, let me find the comparator page here, if I spelled it right. So a fuzzy isn't just a fuzzy. There are a lot of different comparator classes that you can choose to turn on to compare. So one is this Levenstein distance, which compares if maybe you fat fingered something and something moved over, or just compares how distant the strings are from one another, and it creates a threshold calculation. Whereas another option would be like the SoundX comparator. You could have someone spell out, say, Sean wrong versus like Sean like this. And the SoundX comparator will see that, yeah, the letters are not very similar, but the pronunciation is the same, and it'll merge based on, or create a token based on the pronunciation. So it actually creates a phonetic token, and then if the phonetic tokens match. So you can create your own special sauce in Reltio when you're doing your fuzzy matching, because there are a lot of different options that you can mix or match or combine. But a lot of these are, you know, kind of industry standard, like that Levenstein distance or SoundX comparator. But the cool thing Reltio enables are the ability to combine, mix, match, and there's also cleansers and things like that that can be applied to tokenize these in different ways.
Great. Thanks. Another question. So we got two more right now. Could you explain in the demo how to use relevance-based match? What is the difference between relevance-based match and match IQ, and what are the best practices?
I think Suchin might be able to answer that question better. Suchin, do you wanna explain relevance-based matched and match IQ a little bit?
Sure. So relevance-based matching, let's talk about how it is different from the automatic and the suspect rule matches that we have, or match rule types that we have. Automatic and suspect match rule types are more of a binary output rules. So when you put some instruction in one of this rule type, the result will always be either true or false, right? Whether it matched or it did not match. If it did match, then it basically go and perform the action that is tied to that rule type. For example, in automatic, it always goes and automatically merge. With the suspect, if the pair is evaluated to be true, then you will create the potential match. With the relevance-based matching, you have the option to basically, use the score between the match pair to determine what action you want to take on that. So that's really the difference between the binary kind of output match rule type versus the relevance-based match rule type. So every match pair that is evaluated using relevance-based match rule, you will have a score, and you will get to basically define the range of score and what action match engine or Reltio platform should perform on that match pair. That's the difference between the relevance-based and the other type of match rule. The difference between relevance-based and the match IQ is basically a completely different matching engine that Reltio support in addition to the rule-based matching. Match IQ is ML-based or machine learning powered matching. So there is no rule configuration that user has to do. You just have to basically train the model, and we have provided a tool which will allow you to train that model by answering the question to the sample pairs that we present. And based on the answer that you provide, the match IQ module basically derive the matching requirement and build all these things, whatever comparator, tokenizer, whatever we need to build for based on those answers. We will build a model, machine learning model, which is then used for running the matching. So relevance-based matching, automatic merge match rule, and the suspect rule type, they all fall under the rule-based kind of matching, where user has to put a specific instructions how the matching should perform. And match IQ is machine learning powered based matching, where you don't have to write any of these rules. All you have to do is just train the model based on your matching requirement, and match IQ will basically run the matching for you or build whatever it has to do in the background for you. Does that answer the question?
I think so, and if not, then they can put that in chat. There is a couple questions, and Joel, could you speak more on token generation? We have noticed that if we use ignore in token, sometimes the tenant's performance is good, but sometimes it doesn't match on similar values for two different entities.
Yes, so I was gonna come to ignore in token next, so maybe we'll go ahead and jump ahead here. So ignore in token, it basically doesn't, let me talk about what a match token is first. So a match token is basically a shortcut to prevent comparing one entire data set to another, and it go ahead and reduces it to likely matches so that there's a smaller set to compare. And it does that by taking the most identifying attributes and kind of stringing them together into what we call a token. And when those tokens match, it then considers the other attributes not in the token. So for example, if you had last name as one of your match attributes, and you had a data set with 10,000 Smiths, with that as a token or a major part of the token, you could end up comparing many Smiths to one another and creating a huge performance overhead. And so ignoring last name and token in that scenario would improve performance. But the danger in ignoring token is that you're going to reduce the number of things being compared, and you're more likely to mismatches. So there's a bit of an art to deciding which things need to be in a token and which don't. I have some base rules here on some things that should pretty much always be marked with ignore in token. If something is in the not operand, so if you're doing a kind of a negative rule where something does not equal a certain value, you almost always want to have ignore in token turned on for that. Whenever you're using exact or null or exact and all null, so this compares, say you were comparing on a suffix, you had John Senior, John Junior. A lot of times suffix might not be populated, so you wouldn't, if you just do an exact match, if suffix on one record John Senior was populated and on the other was just John, they would not match because null does not match senior. But exact or null would allow senior to match null, and exact or all null would allow null to match null. So whenever you're using exact or null or exact and all null, you want to make sure ignore and token is turned on so that you don't create too many tokens and reduce your match quality. Threshold character is something that for some of the matching tokens, you can limit the number of characters that are going to be compared. So that a certain number of characters have to be compared before it's considered for a match. So if you have two short strings that match, like ink, might be meaningless. It wouldn't meet the threshold of maybe 5 characters that you set. So anytime you're using the threshold character setting, you want ignore and token turned on, because small strings are more likely to generate many matches in the tokens. And so for low cardinality attributes as well. So things like gender, you don't need gender considered in your token. This is something you want to bring them together on those identifying attributes. And then after the tokens match, you want to reduce the set with the differentiating attributes like gender or name. So low cardinality attributes, you want ignore and token turned on. High cardinality attributes, you want the token to consider them. So things like IDs and social securities, emails, make for good things not to ignore and token. And when you have similar match rules that are generating similar tokens, you might want to consider ignore and token on most of the attributes on one of those rules, so that you're getting less tokens in your set, and that'll improve your performance. So to go back to the question specifically, if you're not getting matches you expect to get, I would say you probably have too many things in ignore and token, and I would go back and make sure that your high cardinality attributes are not set to ignore and token, and that might help you there. And a little later in this presentation, I'm also going to show how to troubleshoot some matches.
So Joel, there's some questions here, and we have 20 minutes. But first question: and I'm not gonna, William, I'm skipping the where can we find the Match IQ tool, because I'm trying to figure out who can help us with that question. But the next question is, can we implement segment-based matching? So, for example, I want to execute matching only for direct customer types, but not for indirect customer types. If yes, what configuration is required?
That is a great question. So we have something called the equals operand, and let me show you something like that. So a lot of what we've seen is exact and fuzzy so far, but we have an option called equals. And let's pretend for a second, because this is, here we go, type. So assume this is customer type. You could set your equals to direct. So if you have and equals customer type direct, this match rule will only consider matching together customers that are of the direct customer type. So that's pretty easy to configure using the equals operand. And really quickly, since I heard the question too, if you go to console, you can get to Match IQ from here. It's one of these tiles from the console.
That's great. Gino did put that in the message. So can we use ignore in token on fuzzy match rules? Fields? Sorry, not rules, fields.
So the way that fuzzy works is it generates tokens. It generates tokens to compare. So it doesn't compare last name directly, right? It's going to compare those Levenstein distance results, or it's going to compare the SoundX tokens results. So you need the tokens to make fuzzy work. So that's a good question.
Thanks. And so should we put ignore in token for static or unique values like social security number?
For social security number, I would not put ignore in token, because that's a identifying attribute. It's got a high cardinality. So I would want that as part of my token.
Got it. And do you have any suggestions on how quality of match and merge in Reltio MDM apart from matching results against profiling, like dedupe-based stats? Hopefully I said that right.
So I think that question is asking how does measuring how Reltio is performing versus just like kind of a simple dedupe. And I think that would the easiest way to do that would be to dedupe, get your data set maybe your final count of how many you got, and then load the data to Reltio, let it match merge system, process the set and see what your final count is there. I think you'll see that you get quite a lot more than the simple deduping in a database because of things like SoundX, Levenstein, and the match tokens are really what enables those more complex things to come together that you might not catch with just deduping in like a SQL database.
Great. So there is going to be some follow-up questions that I'm going to post on the community, Joel. Conwar, he actually sent me a direct message. I won't ask that right now, but I will ask, are there any reports, one that can use to review the potential matches in bulk? So potentially a customer, we would like to get matching results in Excel for easy verification by data stewards.
That's a good question. And one of the things I have used in the past is that we have an open source tool for potential match report, and I can put a link to that in the chat here in a second. But it's basically a little Java app that'll spit out 2 records side by side, and you can compare externally. You're going to need to make the matches and merges in Reltio to bring the record together. So someone's going to have to come back and match and merge. I think there is some cool things. Another way you might be able to handle that if you want to have like a downstream system making these decisions is when 2 things become potential matches, you can have it create a message in your SQSQ, and that downstream system could take those messages, create a queue for a data steward to go through, and you could create an API that actually handles the merge. There's an API that you could call to merge the 2 records. So there's a few different ways you can go about that. Let me put this data extract tool in the chat so that folks can find it later to look at their potential matches. So speaking of kind of tuning and looking at your matches after the fact, these first 4 slides were really driven about how do you build your rules, what should your rules look like. The next couple of slides I want to talk about, now that you have built your rules, how do you tune them? And the first tool that's built in the Reltio, it's really nice. It generates this HTML report. It's our static match rule analyzer. And what this thing is doing is it's checking the syntax and your comparator and tokenization classes to make sure basically you configured the rule right. So this is data agnostic. You could have no data, you could have a ton of data. It's not considering your data. It's purely looking at your rules and giving you feedback in this comment section on whether your rules are designed well, syntactically correct, redundant, that sort of thing. And there's almost a stoplight coloring system to tell you what's going on with your rules. So if it's green, your rule is well configured and pretty much ready to go from a syntax perspective. If it's yellow, it might be a duplicate rule. They have a lot of overlap, and you might want to consider combining them or making them more specific. And blue means, hey, your match tokenizer, your token choice, and your comparator choice aren't matching up, and you need to review that. And I know that's a little vague, so if you look at the comment section, it'll give you more details about which choice you maybe should have made instead. So let me show you how you generate this report. So from the console, you'll go back to the data modeler where you're configuring your match rules. And from here, you can hit analyze, and it's going to generate a nice little HTML report and ask you to save it. You can open it up and see what we'll see here in my my demo tenant is we have a few rules that have very similar strategies on matching for first and last name. And it's calling those out here that we're using the same tokens to do fuzzy in both of these rules. Maybe we want to double check that's how we want to handle it. So that's how you generate that report. Because this is an out-of-the-box rule set, there's not a lot of comments because things are pretty much well configured. But after generating your own rule in the match rule builder here, you're going to want to always do that analyze tool to get an idea for if you configured it properly before you start using it to match and merge. All right, if there's no questions there, I'll move on to the dynamic match rule analyzer.
Joel, there's a lot of questions.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
No
I couldn't
worries.
hit my mute button. So, Lori, just kind of go backwards. Lori, you answered a question a couple back, but she said, to reiterate, this ignore in token is basically your solution for exclusion criteria for very particular situations. Is that
Sort of. So you it's for excluding things in these tokens. So these tokens are little representations of a record, and depending on how many rules you have, you could have. So I'm trying to make this real. Let's see. If we're looking at UPS here, right? The token for a match on address line 1 and name might just be UPS and then address. So imagine if you just combine these two strings. Now, if you added fuzzy to address line 1 and applied a few different token generation strategies, now you'll have UPS and maybe 3 token strategies that generate 10 tokens each. You could have all the different SoundX versions of how this might be pronounced, all the different misspellings that could happen tagged onto this UPS. And now we have 80 versions of this record that need to be compared to 80 versions of another record. So what the ignore in token does is it lets you remove things that aren't going to be that valuable. So if you have hundreds and hundreds of UPS stores, maybe the name isn't that valuable. You really just want to compare these addresses or something like that. You can take the less valuable things out of the token. And the thing I'm about to demo will show you kind of why that's important. There's a concept of overmatching and undermatching. So someone was saying they had ignore and token and a lot of things earlier, and they weren't getting as many matches as they were expected. They're undermatching. They need possibly more in the token and more tokens. Overmatching means, hey, everything's performing kind of slow. I probably have generated way, way, way too many tokens. In this dynamic match rule analyzer, it considers your match rule from the point of view of your data rather than the syntax. So the data in your system actually matters. And I want to show you how you get to that. So from the console, you go to tenant management, jobs, new job, analyze match rule. And you can choose what you want to do it on. So I'm going to do it on contact and run the job. And this will run in the background. I have a small data set, so it'll complete pretty quickly. In previous runs, like 40 seconds, but for large sets, it might take a little longer. So it's done now because it's out of pending. I can go to match analysis. And what I want to do is show these token phrases here. So from the token phrases, you can kind of see what's being created. We have Craig, Barry, and address line 1. And the tokens that are being created in this scenario are literally just, let's see. There's a way to show these. Oh, well, here's a token phrase. So there's a multiple Craig Berries here, and this is a token phrase. It doesn't look meaningful, but basically there's an ID for each token that's bringing these versions of Craig Berry together. And in this map here, we can see that the lower limit, which is 5, you kind of want more than 5 tokens, less than 300, and you can look at how your data set fits between these two limits. So if your data set is really close to the 5 or below, you're probably using ignore and token in too many places. If your data set's over here to the right, then you're probably not using ignore and token enough. And your goal is to kind of keep it in the middle here where you're generating lots of match tokens, you're not missing anybody, but you're not slowing your system down by generating needless tokens as well. And you can examine this on a rule by rule basis by using this drop down over here. My data set's pretty small, so it's not going to let me see individual graphs. And you can hit this view profiling to kind of get an idea for some stats on what your data looks like.
So this has been great. There's tons of questions that I don't think we're going to be able to get to them all today. So what it will do is post these into the chat or into the community. I will, and Kartik, your question around the two sources, I'll just go ahead and ask it. We have two sources who feeds the same unique identifier. We have a requirement of matching it, but because we can't use ignore and token on that attribute, the performance is degrading. Do you know a way to solve that issue?
And what was the attribute? Did they say?
We have a requirement of matching it, but because ignore and token, no.
So-
It's an identifier called external member ID. So it's like member ID, like subscriber ID.
And are you doing an exact match on the subscriber ID?
Yes, yes.
Interesting. And so do you have, so do you have any profiling? Do you understand like how often that ID shows up? Are there lots of duplicates in your data set?
No.
So something makes me doubt that ID is what's causing your too large number of tokens. I would look at the other attributes that don't have ignore and token. The first thing I would do, so have you looked at your analyzer here to see like where your graph?
Yeah, yeah. So it is showing that that particular rule is actually generating a lot of tokens.
Mhm.
But when we do ignore and token for that, then it's not matching.
Yes, because you definitely want that identifying attribute in your token. What other attributes are you using?
Because one of the sources is just sending that particular attribute, not other attributes. So we have to do a match on just one attribute. So the rule is having just one attribute as exact match.
Huh, and that's generating a lot of tokens.
Yes.
That's interesting. I would post that rule configuration and maybe if you have a screenshot of the profiling in community, and I think that would be something we'd have to dive deep into to see if we can figure out why those tokens are being generated. But
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good answer, Joel. And I like when people post in the community. And Joel, what I would really like to do is maybe knock out some of these questions. And I don't know if you have another 5 minutes after this, but is that possible? Or if not, we can just post them on the community and just knock them out that way.
sure, I can run a little late.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and answer these questions if you guys want to stay on. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the last 2 or 3 slides of the presentation. But I think that's okay. I want to make sure that we try to get some of these knocked out. So Georgia asked a question, is there a limit on number of matching rules that can be used in parallel?
So there's not a hard limit. A best practice is generally you want to keep it under 10 per entity type. It'd be pretty, so every match rule should have a strong identifying attribute at the center of it. And maybe you could have 2 versions or 3 versions for some of these, but it's pretty rare to have 10 plus identifying attributes that could drive different matches. And so if you have 10 plus rules, go ahead and configure them. But what I would do is I'd come into this dynamic match rule analyzer and start looking at seeing if any of your rules are redundant and aren't adding value. So the way you look at this is for rule 17 in this example, it has a 1-to-1 correlation with rule 8. So 100% of the matches generated by rule 17 are generated by rule 8. So 17 is adding no value for you, but it's slowing down your system by generating more tokens and having to consider this match rule every time. So when you run this match report, what you're going to look for is these red squares are going to tell you that you have highly redundant rules. And I suspect if you're over 10, that you're going to have some rules that are probably not adding as much value as you think they are.
Great, thanks. So we see red color as well in this report a little bit ago. And what does that stand for? What is the red?
Yes, so these red stand for like highly correlated. So you'll see the rules numbers are listed down here and then here. So it's kind of a map of which rules relate to one another. So the red color means they're highly correlated. They're generating the same exact match pairs. So a 0.95 means they're like 95% the same. 1 means they're exactly correlated. And the opposite of that is these blue ones are highly uncorrelated. So they're adding lots of value. They're generating different match sets entirely.
A couple of people have asked, can we do a session like this again? Because we would have ran out of time. So it could be some opportunity, Joel, to kind of do a part 2 of this. We are out of time. Let me ask one more question, Joel, because you promised to go a little bit over. Again, this will be posted to the community. The PowerPoint will be posted to the community as well. I'll try to talk Joel into doing another session around match rules because I think there warrants it. Sounds like there's just so many questions. So after generating this report, is there a way to optimize it, and how do you do it?
So after generating this report, what I would do is I'd target these redundant rules and I'd compare 17 to 8. I'd go into my match rule developing tool and say, look at these two and figure out which one I want to keep, right? Because there's no point in keeping both of these especially when you have a 1, they're completely redundant. And so I'd start paring down my my rules to keep a smaller set. That would be one big way. The other thing I would do I like to organize my rules in order of most matches or least matches to most matches. Rules with less matches tend to be tighter and rules with more matches tend to be looser. So if you go through and process all the potential matches in a tighter rule, it tends to reduce the sets down the tree. So there's less work to be done total. And then I'd also consider which rules are 100% of when there's a match, I end up merging, and I'd probably turn those onto auto. And you can save a lot of time by not having your data stewards process those, and it's going to also reduce the correlated sets downstream.
Great. And Georgie asked a few more questions, and Jay says a couple of things. So what I want to do, Georgie, I've posted some questions on your behalf already. I'm going to post those, and Joel, if you can promise to get to those questions as they're posted, I'll make sure to tag you in those community questions. Guys, thank you all so much for coming. Hopefully the session was good. It does sound like we need another session on this. Just maybe we need another 4 sessions on it. I'm not sure, but this was great. I mean, it's the first time we've kind of run over, and especially with questions and didn't get finished. But I think that's what we have to do. Is it's a very hot topic, and I'll talk to Joel the next few weeks to try to get something on the calendar for everyone. So again, I've got these questions now, and I'll make sure to get them out on the community as soon as possible. Thank you everyone for coming. We had a great session, and lots of people were interested in match and merge for sure. So, please reach out on the community for additional questions, community.reltio.com, and come to the next session around API and Kafka. I didn't say the whole thing, but that's going to be a really great session as well on next Wednesday. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everything, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Bye.
Yep. And I'm going to stay on here just for a minute or two to see if there's any other questions that come in. But Joel, great job. Lots of questions, and I knew there would be though.
Thanks.
So I had a feeling. Looking forward to session 2, Joel. Let's somebody post it. So
Me too. There's so many topics I could dive a mile deep in. So, or any one of these questions, really, I could have probably spent an hour on a few of these, just walking through a demo or trying to solve for.
yeah, I know it's a big topic, but I just didn't know how deep it went. And somebody mentioned great session. But if we can go a bit more detail next time, and I thought, wow, that's so. But this is great feedback. Great stuff. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna stop this, end it up, and thank you, everyone, for coming. So, thanks again, Joel.
Yep.
Great job.
Thank you and everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.